we'll turn now to someone who has great and vast experience here in Greece with doing some of these things that Elizabeth just shared with us, primarily protecting the forests that we have. It's my pleasure to introduce to you now, joining us from Athens, Spiros Kinias. In his day job, Spiros is a full-time freelance architect, but among many, many other volunteer activities, he's the founder and remains an active volunteer with the South Hymettos Mountain Forest Protection Team, otherwise known as EDNI. And I'm just going to turn it directly over to you, Spiros, because I'm really looking forward to hearing about the work that you and your organization are doing. So welcome.
Thank you, Gina. Good evening to everybody. Wow, I mean, what a big topic. And really, I'm so glad that Elizabeth started this off, hitting it right on the head. I mean, it's so important to get the prevention aspect of the whole matter much more improved to what we're doing already. Because I mean, we are going to talk about the effect of fire, but we tend to have a say in the volunteer in the wildfire volunteer firefighting sector that says that fires actually start in winter, and it means that effectively what happens is that things, as we all know, disasters don't just happen for a simple reason. You need to have a lot of factors that actually combine in order to generate a big disaster. So yes, Elizabeth, by all means, especially when you're in contact with the Greek government and the Greek officials, do stress the fact that we are lacking in prevention. I mean, there have been, I think there's been 3 programs running in this country, and the Nero 3 is the one that's beginning now, and this is about clearing fuel from the forests and things like that. But these are things that we probably needed to start doing 20 years ago. So we're really lagging behind with regards to what needs to be done. So thank you so much about that. Now let me just share my screen, my presentation here, and do let me know whether you can see it or not. Are we okay with that? With this, so is the presentation visible to everybody? Excellent. Okay.
Looks great.
Okay. Well, let's start. I mean, Gina said that I am not a firefighter. I am an architect by profession. I've been volunteering in forest protection and wildfire firefighting for over 20 years. I'm now a trainer and the chief of the South Hymettos Mountain Forest Protection Volunteers, which for short we're going to call them EDNI. What you're seeing, for those of you that don't really know much about Hymettos is one of the 3 large mountains surrounding the city of Athens, and it's the southernmost. All of them are very much affected by wildfire, especially in the last few years. But before we start, it's always good to remember that fire isn't just some random evil that has ensued upon us. Wildfire is very important for our forests, and especially when it comes to the Mediterranean ecosystems, it was always a part of the natural life cycle of these forests, and in many ways it is very beneficial as well for the forests. The plant life and the wildlife in general has in fact adapted to wildfire, because you can get wildfire happening in the wild naturally. There's only one way for this to happen, and that's lightning strikes. You don't have the spontaneous combustion of forests in any way. Lightning is the only natural way for wildfire to be ignited. All of the other ways are actually down to humans. So this is something that we need to keep in the back of our heads. But fire in itself was always in a part of the natural ecosystem. The life cycle of the forest has adapted to that. In many ways, we have this situation where fire can actually eradicate disease. It can provide nutrients to the soil. So there are many good aspects to this. But we have to keep in mind the frequency of wildfires. Naturally, fires would probably burn the land every 60 to 120 years, as I said, due to lightning. The problem is us. Humans came into the equation, and effectively we changed this in two fundamental ways. One being the fact that we actually reduced this 60 to 120 year window to fires happening much more frequently. And we also, as our society developed, we also turned our back to fundamental practices that used to take place in the forests in the past, effectively letting loose with everything but suppression. Suppression was the key element that everybody was worried about because, fire was there. It was very evident, as Elizabeth said. And it's, in a sense, the same thing that we're doing today. We're very much focused on suppression rather than working with prevention. And thinking about the fact that, people alienated themselves from the natural environment. And a lot of the professions that were taking place inside the forests have actually now pretty much died away. This led to a huge accumulation of fuel in the forests. And, dead organic matter, when a fire erupts, actually translates into fuel, as we all know. So when you have a lot of fuel, you have very powerful, very extreme fire behavior. So a combination of years and years, I should say decades, of suppression and a very strict suppression regime where, every fire needed to be doused out as soon as possible, disregarding the beneficial aspect of wildfire, if effectively turned what could have been something beneficial to the ecosystem as well as to us into a monster, and it truly turned fire into a very dangerous enemy nowadays, with extreme behavior being very evident in many cases. Doing this for over 20 years, I remember that 10 years ago we would tell people that when we were training the younger volunteers, we would actually show them a couple of slides in a presentation and in their training presentation, and say that we're just mentioning these extreme fire behaviors so that you guys have a full appreciation of what fire can do. But we were always telling them, you're not very likely to encounter such fire behavior. These are things that are happening in extreme mega fires, in California or in Australia, and you're not very likely to encounter things like that. Well, nowadays, we are pretty much seeing every single fire exhibit extreme fire behavior after the 15-minute mark. So this is something that has fundamentally changed the way that we are approaching fire and the effect that we can have in fighting wildfire. So this has actually developed a truly dangerous enemy, and it's global. It's not just in this country. You obviously know that it's happening in the US, but it's happening everywhere. We can see over the last few years massive fires taking place in California. Earlier on, somebody mentioned the Texas fire that's already been going this year. You've had Maui in 2023, and my God, Maui sounds so much like Mati, and I was there. And we're going to talk about this later on. Canada has had its fair share of mega fires, and it's happening, everywhere around the world, even in Siberia. And this matters because ecosystems like the one you encounter in Siberia, when they burn, they're not actually adapted to fire that well. They don't regenerate that well. And of course, we've all been witnessing what's been happening in the Amazon rainforest over the last few years. Shocking expanses of forest being burnt out for very different reasons, I should say, to the ones that we have fires for. But so it's happening all over the planet, and of course, Greece isn't an exception. I should say that the wildfire, the extreme wildfire era probably started around the 2000 with a huge fire on the island of Samos. For Greece, this was, I think, the first fire that we had significant damage to infrastructure, lost homes, and a death of an elderly lady with this huge fire in Samos. But over the next few years, this started to become a trend, unfortunately. 2006, Halkidiki with 2 deaths, massive fire. 2007, one of the worst years with regards to fires for the Peloponnese, for Evia, and indeed the Attica region, with 84 deaths, thousands and thousands of homes lost, villages completely burned. So a very, very bad year indeed. And I remember back then that, a lot of us that were involved with this vowed that we would never allow something like that to happen. And boy, were we, foolish enough to believe that. Continuing this whole suppression era, and in 2009, we had a new wake-up call with, a huge fire in the northeast region of Attica near Athens, which just, darkened the sky above the capital, and kind of hit home with people realizing that this can affect huge areas and has a significant impact. Of course, these are big fires that I'm mentioning. That doesn't mean that they were the only fires during those years. 2012, Chios Island had its turn to burn, and then massive disaster there, which brings us to 2018 and this devastating fire at Mati, with it being one of the worst fires of the century with regards to its death toll. Mind you, it wasn't a mega fire. It wasn't, a very, very large fire with regards to the burned area, but it was an extreme fire in the way that the fire behaved. Combined with the topography and the way that the area was built, it led to 104 deaths, devastating, a whole community. And I happened to be there that night, and it really was a very difficult night. Now things didn't get better. 2021, we're going to talk about a lot of fires happening in the last 3 years. 2021, we had a massive fire that pretty much burned the whole of northern Evia, a beautiful, beautiful, huge forest that was just, completely eradicated. Attica, again, had a very big fire in the eastern side of Mount Parmitha in 2021, a fire that reached pretty much the outskirts of Athens, affecting, municipalities of Kifisia and even affecting Tatoi Air Base, which is where the firefighting planes for Attica are situated. You can actually see that in the photograph at the top right. 2021 also affected Vilia and the mountains at the western side of the Attica region with some very massive fires, very extreme fire behavior in those situations. And that, I think by then we had realized that we were probably going to be seeing a lot more of that. What we didn't expect was that the very north of the country would be affected in 2023, just last year, with a massive fire, the biggest fire in European history, the biggest wildfire in European history, in 2023 in Davia, in the northeast of the country. Now, I I happened to have worked in that area a few years ago as an architect, developing a hiking destination and doing the planning for the hiking trails of the municipality of Alexandropoli. So I knew these areas very well, and I was absolutely shocked by the development of that fire and how fast it engulfed vast expanses. But it wasn't the only one for 2023. We had a lot of fires in 2023. We actually had a very big fire hitting the other side of Parita, which was burnt in 2021. We had the eastern side. This time, the western side of Parita was affected. And Parita is very dear to everybody that lives in Athens because everybody considered it the mountain, the blessed mountain of Athens, as it had been pretty much left intact, with an exception of the fire in 2007 that I mentioned earlier. So that came as a blow to all the residents of Athens, with having pretty much lost everything but the north of Mount Parnitha. And it wasn't the only mountain affected. I do apologize that this graph is in Greek. It comes from the Athens Observatory pyrometeorological team. And effectively what it shows is that over the last 7 years, 23% of the region of Attica burned. This is huge, as you can understand. All of the mountain regions around Attica were affected, even non-mountain were affected. But the most important thing to understand here is that a lot of these fires are recurring fires. They are fires that are reburning, if you like, areas that had been affected by previous fires. And that is very bad, I think we all know, because it's bringing us closer to desertification. What we are effectively doing is we are reburning areas before nature has a chance to regenerate there. And we are depleting nature's ability to regenerate whole ecosystems. So it's not just a matter of, it's not a quantitative thing. It's also a matter of which areas burn. Now, having said that, if you look at the course of fire, I think we can all identify an upward trend, even though it's in Greek. Top left, we can see the annual area of wildland burnt. Between 1955 and 2018, you can see this huge spike here in 2007. It's the fires I mentioned. Well, 2007 is here. This ends in 2018. If you think that this spike here actually corresponds to this part here, I think you can all see my cursor, right? You can tell that we've actually been going worse and worse, and the upward trend is very evident from these graphs. Of course, an upward trend in these graphs means a deteriorating situation out in the field. So, you probably don't really think about this being here tonight. You're probably the people, some of the people that believe that wildfire can affect you. But, a lot of people actually don't really believe that yet. It's actually starting to hit home for a lot of people with what's been happening in the last few years, but there's still people that believe that this doesn't really directly affect them. Well, the answer is that it does, and it does to a very large extent. It can affect your home, your property. It can affect your car. It can affect your whole neighborhood. It can affect your life and the life of your loved ones. But there's also an aspect that a lot of people don't realize. It affects everybody, whether they are directly affected by fire or indirectly affected by fire. Again, I apologize for this being in Greek, but I can explain this quite easily. What this graph shows is the mortality rate per week. Now, the spike that you see for the wider area of Athens, right? The spike that you see here is actually the week of the Varibobi fire in 2021 that I mentioned earlier. And you see that we have an 80% mortality increase for the wider area of Athens. Now, this isn't actually people who burned. We didn't have a huge loss of life when it came to that particular fire. This is people indirectly affected by fire. This is people that never actually got to see any flames at all. And there's a lot of mechanisms that are working in the background when it comes to such major wildfire events that do affect vast areas around the area that is actually thrown in the path of the blaze. We don't really know the exact mechanisms behind why mortality rates increase in areas that are not directly involved with fire. Scientists speculate that it has to do a lot with stress factors and psychological issues. There's also, of course, a deterioration in air quality with the smoke transfer from the fire. But we don't really know why that happens to such an extent, because you can understand that 80% an 80% increase in mortality rate over that particular week is a huge thing. So yes, wildfire does affect everybody,